Can start.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jackie, and thanks for everyone attending today. As Jackie mentioned, it's a new program for us. We're really excited to have launched it a couple of months ago at the eDNA conference. And so I'm here today to step you through what it looks like and a little bit more discussion around it. First of all, I would like to make some acknowledgements. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I'm presenting this webinar on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be attending the webinar today. I'd also like to acknowledge Northern Land Council and the Waterman Rangers. You'll see a lot of their wonderful faces in the webinar today. And what you won't see though is, and what I'd like to really acknowledge today, is their contribution to the development of this program. I spent some time up with the Waterman Rangers and Northern Land Council last year, and it was really helped formulate this program and test it out. So thank you very much to the Waterman Rangers. So a bit of an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. We're going to go through a little bit of what is eDNA. I suspect a lot of people here already know a little bit about eDNA, so I won't delve into too much detail, give you a nice snapshot, talk a little bit about how it can be used to survey country, and go into a bit of detail on the program and around the value and the program value and our vision for it. And then, as Jackie mentioned, at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. We're going to do a couple of polls throughout the webinar. Jackie's going to do one now just to get a little bit more information and a bit more of a feel for the room.
Yep, so the first poll we have here is what is your interest in the EnviroDNA traditional owner program? So I'll just launch that one for you. So the options are traditional owner monitoring on country, a potential collaborator, accessing traditional owner eDNA sampling skills for future projects, or other. And if you've got something else, you can pop it in the chat. I'll just wait for everyone to answer.
Probably. Yeah, so that's like most people. Thank you. That's really great to see. We've got a nice range of, lots of, different participants. Great to see some potential collaborators too. Obviously going to be really key in the success of this project, or this program. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So I start with who is EnviroDNA, who are we? Just a little bit of a snapshot. We are a business that is revolutionising biodiversity measurement data through environmental DNA. We're based in Melbourne and we have about 25 employees and continuing to see growth there. We are currently servicing Australia and abroad. Fielding a lot more international inquiries over the last sort of 12 months, which is great to see. We have field data and molecular scientists and project managers to make sure that we're delivering a great service delivery outcome. And we also do a lot of research. So we've got, between everyone here, there's over 250 scientific publications. So what is eDNA? For those of you who, aren't aware, it's so all species leave traces of their DNA in the environment. That's through their skin cells, hair, or bodily secretion. And this is what we term environmental DNA, or for short, eDNA. There's many ways, or many, I guess, environmental samples that contain environmental DNA. That's water. A lot of you are probably familiar with the water sampling. We do a lot of scat sampling, so for diet analysis or looking for threatened species with predator scats. Soil health, swabbing, insects, pollen. We'll recently be doing a little bit more in the research space around air sampling. So lots of different methods for all types of projects. The two main types of, I guess, eDNA analysis is target species analysis. It's your qPCR, so very similar to your COVID-style testing. It amplifies and quantifies a target species DNA from your environmental sample, and that sample could come from anywhere. So we've got over 70 assays for different species. They're native, invasive, and we're developing more and more each day. So within a project, you can also develop an assay specific to a species. The other analysis type is biodiversity assessments, which uses eDNA metabarcoding to target a barcode region for amplification. So if you're looking for a group of, a whole taxonomic group such as fish, or multiple taxonomic groups like vertebrates, we can use the same environmental sample that you would use in the qPCR or the target species, and run it for a biodiversity assessment. We've got a range of analysis types. So we've got decapods, marine invertebrates, fish, algae, amphibians, vertebrates, plants, and other invertebrates. I guess a bit of a summary of the advantages of eDNA. It's non-invasive, so this is both environmentally but also culturally. You're obviously not having to go into the environment as much. It's just for a water project, you're just getting a water sample. It's a simple sampling method, so no ecological qualification is required to take an eDNA sample, which then broadens kind of the audience and the ability for everyone to be able to undertake ecological surveys. It has a really large temporal and spatial reach. So the picture on your map is some recent Victoria statewide biodiversity assessments that were done by citizen scientists, showing you that, that real spatial reach. We're also seeing a lot of projects around change over time and seasonal changes too. It's highly sensitive, so a lot of studies have been done on this, on species specific, but also looking at your biodiversity assessments, and in often a lot of cases it's it has greater sensitivity than your traditional methods. And it's cost effective because it's not laborious in terms of collecting the field samples. It brings costs down on ecological surveys quite a lot. And with the sensitivity and the ability to monitor more sites and all of that together means that we can detect species a lot earlier. So how can we use eDNA to survey country? We're going to focus at the moment, the traditional owner program, on water sampling. And so through water sampling, I guess the three main applications for on-country would be around establishing that baseline biodiversity data. It could be for a site, it could be for an area, a whole waterway, and it would be around understanding the distribution of species, and also to measure river and wetland or lake kind of water body health. It can be used to conduct ongoing biodiversity monitoring, which would be looking at detecting that change over time. So you may want to do it before or after disturbances, for example, fire management, or, and sort of another kind of management intervention, or potentially there's been development in the area and you're wanting to understand, the impact or the potential impact for that. And the third being, can be a monitoring tool with Aboriginal waterway assessment, so AWAs. It can be used in that forum to inform management decisions such as your cultural flows and ongoing monitoring requirements as part of those plans. So the program itself, I'll just run through now. So what does it look like? And in a little bit more detail. So I guess the why we developed this program is we want the program to be able to provide the background and the knowledge and skills to undertake eDNA water sampling on country. So I guess that's the first and foremost, but we also want to provide those skills to be able to interpret the eDNA data, to learn about species distribution, and also to inform some management decisions and investment decisions on country. So these are the waterman rangers here that I was talking about. They went through the program last year, and this is down on the Catherine River with their certification. So we're really excited and passionate about this program. We've really thought about what would make this program meaningful and successful. And so for that, we have a vision. We want to see biodiversity in the hands of all traditional owner nations across Australia. And so we're really targeting this at not just Victoria where we're based, but all over Australia. In RAP, non-RAP groups, we want to see it at broad scale uptake. I guess when we think about what a successful program would look like, we want it to provide connection or a way of connection. So it facilitates that connection to country and a meaningful engagement tool. Using eDNA, which is at the moment, it's an exciting and accessible ecological survey technique, which can help really facilitate that connection. We want to see leadership. So through the program, we want to give enough skills and knowledge that the traditional owners can lead rather than just be participants in ecological surveys, and really lead that decision making out on country because they've got data to help inform some of those decisions. We want to empower, so place the power of eDNA biodiversity data and the ability to generate it in the hands of the traditional owners. So it's directly through them. And also opportunity. Now, this is a long-term, for us, it's very much a long-term vision for the program. We want to enable the survey skills that traditional owners have on country to be accessed by industry, which would then generate employment opportunities and further career paths in the water management industry across Australia. So I guess, how do we see the program in practice? It's an evolving program. It certainly is going to be adaptively developed, I guess. So we want lots of feedback. Each time we roll it out, we're getting feedback and we're just tweaking things, making sure it's certainly fit for purpose. So our thinking around this is that it would have 5 stages. So obviously a large part of this is that upfront, we need to seek funding opportunities, whether that's directly with government or grants, industry providing sponsorship opportunities, traditional owner nations and groups themselves, and other philanthropic or other sort of sponsorship models as well. We then see the uptake. So, there's an identification of interested traditional owner nations. Now, this can happen with the first and second is very interconnected. And then the third is obviously getting out there, doing the training. The training will be targeted at a group as a whole and a nation, so that skill set is retained within the nation rather than just within an individual. We then obviously implementation, and this is where the traditional owner nations and groups will use the eDNA skills as an ongoing monitoring tool on country. And then, as I mentioned, obviously that longer term vision is that industry will engage traditional owners to undertake surveys that have more traditionally been done by ecological consultants, and providing an additional source of income. So what's involved? The program split into 3 parts. It's undertaken like a project. As I mentioned before, we really wanted to get away from that individual certification and move towards a traditional owner group or nationwide approach. We're conscious of the fact that we need these skills to stay within the groups. And so if it's not tied to an individual, then, there is longevity of that knowledge. And so it's scoped up in 3 parts, and that's done with the traditional owners at the start. Part 1 is an introduction to eDNA, and I'll go through all these in a little bit more detail, but this is just a little high-level snapshot. Part 2 is a pilot study on country, and so this is where really we go out and we sample for multiple days and just really, it gives the traditional owners the opportunity to really lead that after some initial training, and develop their confidence in being able to lead ecological surveys. Part 3 will be the results and knowledge sharing session, and this would be, sort of 6 to 8 weeks after that part 2, when the results were available from the pilot study. We'll provide ongoing support and training, so we'll have sort of yearly refreshers available to everyone, and obviously always here as support, and we have eDNA sample discounts as well for future analysis too. We also will have available, once this gets up running, a little bit more, some advanced training options. So, the most obvious one for this one is that data analysis. So we would delve a little bit deeper into data analysis and teach some new skills in that with eDNA data. So part 1, intro to eDNA. So this can be done here at EnviroDNA, or as this picture shows with the Waterman Ranges, we did it up in Catherine. So it's, I guess, ideal to be done an in-person one, but we can work through, an online or just slightly hybrid arrangement with that, given we are trying to work across Australia as well. We'll go through what is eDNA, really, step through the technical side of things of eDNA. If it was here, we would go on a lab tour, to show where samples go and really get that understanding of the whole life cycle of a project. We'd then head out to a nearby waterway and do that water sampling training. So everyone would do some sampling. And that would be the introduction to water sampling. Not long after that, we would do a pilot study. We'd work through the pilot study that would be determined by the traditional owner. So, we're imagining around sort of 50 samples, but it's very much dependent on each group and each nation. They will pick the particular sites. It will be sort of 1 to 3 days on country, depending on the size of sort of this pilot study. And it will be undertaken with EnviroDNA staff. So, as you can see in this picture here, we've got the Waterman Ranges. In this, very much they led the on-country part of the pilot study when we were out there. And that is very much the intent. So EnviroDNA, we will be there, and we'll be there to troubleshoot and provide some additional sort of information, particularly around those, sampling considerations that we probably didn't get through in that initial water sampling in part 1. So that's around, hydrology. What are some of the things? How do we safely access water sampling? And, the pathways for contamination, which is obviously, a really important consideration for eDNA projects. So this part will be very much led by the traditional owners. There'll also be the opportunity for knowledge sharing. Now, we know that this won't always be the case on every project, but it will look at sort of blending that traditional knowledge with the scientific data, or what's known scientifically around particular species that's expected on country. It may just be within the traditional owners themselves. They may just want to talk about it, or it may include the broader stakeholders. And so we will work through that with the traditional owner group or nation at the start and understand what that may look like for their program. And then there's the results session. So this is part 3. We've gone away. The samples have headed to the lab. We've run the analysis. We largely run vertebrate, but there's opportunities when you're sort of scoping up that pilot study to, pop on, say, decapods, or, you're really interested in, platypus, and so adding on some additional analysis. So we will provide a traditional owner report, which will be similar to our normal reports, but a lot more pictures and a little bit more, feel around kind of that on-country sampling event that happened. So it's something that, they will be able to share with the broader nation, and, support kind of if they were, ever talking about their certification, they will be able to present this. Again, we will go through the data, talk about what it means, what it's saying, those sorts of things, finishing the storytelling a little bit there. What did we sort of expecting to see there? What, and then versus what actually was detected, and some of the reasons why some things we thought were going to be there weren't, or vice versa. And so just really opening up that conversation around the data and the story that it's telling around biodiversity. The other main thing we'll talk about in this session will be around the management application of eDNA. So how you can use that data and that information to then analyse it, to then inform management and investment decisions. So we'll have a little bit of a module on that too. So that's kind of the guts of the program. As I mentioned, it's very much adaptive. It's very much nation specific. And so we certainly, there are the 3 parts, but they are developed at the start of the initiation of the program with the traditional owners to just understand what a program would look like for them. So certainly we are, interested in feedback around, improvements and what worked, what didn't work. And so it's a very adaptive program. I think we've got another poll just based on that, because I've done a lot of talking. We'll do a really quick poll, and then I'll throw it out to some questions.
Cool, thanks, Sarah. Yep, so we've got another poll here. And that's, what is your main barrier or concern for engaging in this traditional owner eDNA program? So I'll just launch that one. The options are funding constraints, traditional owner time constraints, facilitation of ongoing support past the program, and knowledge sharing and cultural IP. That's another one. It's like funding might be the top constraint.
Yeah, and I think, I mentioned this really early on. It was great to see potential collaborators on this call, because, obviously being able to fund a program like this, it's a very important element. I think obviously the other really important element that's highlighted there is that ongoing support. And so, we certainly have things in place to be able to do that. But again, we are conscious of being, adaptive in the way we do things. And so, you know, one way may not work for everyone. And so we will certainly, I think, probably expand that a lot as we get feedback of, you know, this is where we really needed support. This is where, you know, we probably don't need it so much. And so we'll certainly, with that feedback, really keep that in front of mind.
I might end that one there. All right. Is the poll done? We have a few questions filtering in. Is it time for the Q&A?
Yeah, yep, we are ready for those.
All right, let's jump into some of the questions. So we had one here that was about extracting eDNA. So it says how to extract eDNA samples from water samples, for example. Is it difficult and needs expensive tools compared to traditional DNA analysis?
So we, obviously at EnviroDNA, we have a purpose-built lab that does all of that. We, you know, have a standard sort of sample price that would include that. There's been a lot of efficiency over time. We've gotten some robots. So I think, yes, probably not an easy question to answer there, but certainly there's been a lot of efficiencies over the last sort of probably 2 to 3 years in the space that's meant, yeah, it's at a large scale, it's, you know, it's a very affordable survey method.
Yeah. We have another one here that says, do you consider data sovereignty for these data sets, i.e. where it ends up and how it is used?
So very much for these projects, the data is a traditional owners. We won't be using it elsewhere unless, you know, the traditional owners have requested us to. And I think probably, you know, that's a really great point. And certainly, you know, we could make that a little bit clearer that, you know, it's, you know, as in any of our projects, we certainly work through that privacy and ownership, and our data is always owned by our clients. So, yeah, we'd certainly work through with each traditional owner group what that would look like.
Yep. And then a follow-up was, do you discuss with them the potential for misuse and risks?
I guess, is that, I'm assuming that's a little bit around misuse of eDNA and limitations. Yes, most certainly. When we talk about, we do our day where we introduce eDNA, and even in the results, right? You know, there's a level of interpretation that needs to happen. And so we do talk about some of the limitations, some of the things that we really need to be mindful of when we're out sampling, all of those things that fit into that broader conversation around, you know, limitations and I guess risk, you know, of using a particular survey method, which is the same with every method that you use. Yeah.
We do have a question here asking about how much the training would cost. Just a rough idea.
Yeah. So as I kind of mentioned, it's based on a project cost. So obviously that part 2 really fluctuates a lot, but it's about, we've tried to kind of pitch it, you know, at its really basic, it would be, you know, sort of a little bit over maybe the 10 grand mark, and then, you know, as you make it more, you know, certainly the last few that have been scoped up with around the 50 sample, it's around 20,000 for a group. So that's no numbers capped. It is, you know, as many people to participate in that traditional owner group.
Yeah. And we have a technical question here that was sent to us based on number of reads, but they said it might be more relatable to the previous session. So we might get back to you via email after this one. Another question was, you stated that EnviroDNA can provide training of eDNA techniques to groups outside of Victoria. Can it be done collaboratively via video as well, or is it best for EnviroDNA to travel to the monitoring site in person?
Yep. So if I was to explain kind of what we did with the Waterman Ranges, so it was a bit of a hybrid approach. There is value in certainly us being there in person for some elements of it. And so, again, we can kind of slice and dice it. If there is a local person that is really has done a lot of eDNA survey, we can look at those options too. But certainly for the one we did up with the Waterman Ranges in the NT, we did part 1 online. So we did, rather than a whole day of listening to me online, we did sort of, I think it was 3 little sessions of about 1 to 1 hour-ish, just going through the different elements. I then went up there and we did that sort of the last part of part 1, which was the initial sampling training. We did that on an hour or so in the afternoon, and then went out on country for a couple of days. So and obviously then the results we've done online as well. So I think to get the most out of it, it is a hybrid approach, but we're also really there's a lot of people we collaborate with that there's potential to use a more localized input for that as well.
I'll just go back. We had a 2-part question. I think the first part of this question, we might get back to you over email. I think it's a bit more relevant to the previous session. But the second one was, how can someone sample terrestrial habitat for biodiversity using eDNA?
Yeah. So I think, there's lots of different ways to do a terrestrial. I guess starting at water sampling, we pick up a lot of terrestrial animals in water samples that are either, they're opportunistically using water, or in runoff, you're getting DNA come down into a waterway or a wetland. So it's a really nice snapshot of those terrestrial species that are living kind of around your water source. We do soil samples, which can look at species that are in the soil. As I mentioned, we're sort of doing some research into air, which is a really exciting kind of emerging area in eDNA, which I think will be a really key part of terrestrial if it's if it does provide a technically suitable method to use. So we also have insect methods and other sort of invertebrates as well.
Yeah. Okay, we've got another question around participation. So is the participation in this program driven by the Aboriginal group? What are the benefits that are offered to the Aboriginal group, e.g. via the revenue stream? That's the first part of this question. Yeah.
So definitely driven by the traditional owners. I think, we've obviously spoken to a number of traditional owner groups directly. And so that's, obviously a really straightforward way to ensure that happens. But we've also spoken to potential collaborators and certainly, the message that, we certainly and collaborators are reiterating is that, ultimately it's the traditional owner's decision if they want to partake in the training, if it's something they're interested in, so whilst we would love to have everyone across Australia, we also recognise that, not everyone will want to do that. So, at this point in time, it's just not a priority. And so certainly, that's an element.
Yeah. And we've got a second part of this question, which I feel like is nice and relevant because it's Citizen Science Month this month. So it says, how does this program relate to citizen science?
So I guess it's a good question. It probably doesn't have an interface really, because again, it's traditional owner led. And so certainly if traditional owners, wanted to include broader community and stakeholders, then certainly that there's, it's open to that pathway. There's also nothing stopping, running this program for a citizen science group either. It's, it's flexible enough to be able to target citizen scientists as well as, separately, but in addition to just being traditional owner focused.
Yeah. That's all the questions we received. If you have any more, you can pop them in the chat. We do have a few minutes left. But otherwise, if we didn't answer your question and it's one that's best suited for email, we will get back to you after the session individually.
Yes. And yeah, I guess to kind of close it out, yeah, thank you everyone for attending, and thanks Jackie for helping me work through it all. And obviously really just want to reiterate the acknowledgement of Northern Land Council and the Waterman Ranges. You know, really important part of kind of us thinking through and developing this program. So a really big element. Yeah, and yeah, so I guess please reach out if you're a traditional owner group or nation interested in participating in the program, and also if you're a potential collaborator or you know, or kind of know of funding sources that we may be able to tap into for some of the program. So yeah, I think we've got one last what's it called, a poll to finish off. So thank you everyone, and you know, it's been great to kind of share this program that we're really excited about.
So we'll just end on a final poll here, which was how valuable